bienvenidos una vez más a Arraigados en la Palabra. Esta semana estaremos hablando de Génesis 11, versículos 1 al 9. So far, the book of Genesis is showing us what happens to mankind as they move away from God, either by rebellion or disobedience. We saw it with Adam and Eve, Noah and the flood, and now here we are in Genesis 11 with the Tower of Babel. So the blessings of God were renewed in Genesis 6 through 9, but degeneration occurred rapidly. Some may say that it escalated very quickly. Get it? Now let's look at these verses with me. We are in Genesis 11, verse 1. It tells us that they were unified. They were speaking the same language. They had the same culture. Now, who is they? These are the people that descended from Noah, specifically Shem, one of Noah's sons. Verse 2. So as the people moved east, they found a valley called Shinar. Now, this is something very interesting to me, that these people, we're going to see that they wanted to make a name for themselves. Now, this is what's really interesting. I told you that they are the descendants of Shem. Shem in Hebrew is pronounced Sham. Now, the word Sham in Hebrew means name. So I just made that connection, and to me, that was like an interesting fact. So they get to this place called Shinar, and they started this massive building project to make themselves great by building a great city with a huge tower in rebellion of God's command in Genesis 9 verse 1 of repopulating the earth, filling the earth once again. That was the command that God gave to Noah and his sons after the flood. In verse 3, it tells us the materials that they were using. And I did so much research on this because I like to pay attention, and I invite you to also pay attention to how the Bible tells what. So here, the Bible is so specific of the elements or materials that they were using to build this tower. So that just it was highlighted to me that they wanted to use oven fire bricks instead of stones and asphalt instead of mortar. So I started digging and looking into this stuff, and I found really cool things. You have to understand that they substituted God-made materials, natural materials, for man-made materials. And that's kind of like a statement saying that they were in charge now. And of course, these materials, interestingly enough, were also waterproof. The hearts and the materials used here shows us that it was not only the disobedience to God's command to fill the earth, like he said in Genesis 9, but also this belief that God was going to keep his promise of not flooding the earth again. So let's talk about these bricks and stones for a second. Some characteristics of bricks are this. They are unnatural and artificial. They are identical and uniform. And they are functionally undifferentiated. Okay? So I believe that the Tower of Babel is the perfect symbol of a secular society. And by that, I mean one that sets itself up in arrogance and opposition to the will of God. If any of this sounds familiar to what we're seeing today, well, there you have it. What is more unnatural than a society that rejects God? There's no true individuality. There's false individuality, but there's no true individuality. And their works are reduced to interchangeable roles. Right? Now, what about the stones? Let's go to 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 and 5. Peter says here, "Draw near to him, Christ, a living stone, rejected by men, but chosen and honored by God. Be you yourselves living stones." And then he continues to tell what does that mean. But then in 1 Peter chapter 2, just verse 7, just a couple of verses down, it says, "This precious value then is for you who believe. But for those who disbelieve," who do not believe what they're talking about here, "the stone which the builders rejected, this became the very cornerstone." Now the Apostle Paul in the book of Ephesians chapter 2 verses 21 and 22, I think, he tells us that the cornerstone is Jesus Christ. Now the story continues in verse 4 and tells us that they wanted to build this sky high of a tower to make a great name for themselves. They wanted to make something big and loud and proud, right? This height does not only represent pride, it also means that they did not trust God. Why? Because remember that this happened after the flood. For 2 weeks, we were covering what happened with Noah and the story of Noah. So we're talking about these descendants. They don't trust God anymore. So just in case God decides to flood the earth again, they are going to build this high tower so they won't be killed. Number one. And number two, they are being disobedient to God's command after the flood of multiply, spread, multiply, and refill the earth. They're going high. They're not going wider. Think about that for a second. And then verse 5. Okay. Bear with me for a second, okay? It says that the Lord came down to see this tower, to see what they were doing. He came to the city to see what they were building, this magnificent piece of architecture, right? For me, the language that is used in verse 5, it sounds a little sarcastic because God does not have to come down to see. He does not have to travel. He does not have to move himself to see what's happening on the earth. So for me, this language kind of emphasizes how silly of an idea this was, that they could build a tower that will reach the heavens. On verse 6, it tells us how God is coming up with the solution to this problem, that these people are building this tower and working together to do this. Now, if you're like me, you might be wondering, what is the issue here? Why is God opposed to such unity and productivity, right? The answer is mankind's capacity of turning gifts into curses, in turning abilities into abuses. A powerful and unified humanity inclined to do evil could accomplish great wickedness. No matter how perverse, ridiculous, outrageous something may seem, mankind can and will attempt to do it when their sinful natures become aligned. This shows you the power of unity and how much we can accomplish when we are unified. And obviously, they were inclined to do what was wrong here in this context. But the Bible has so many examples of what we can accomplish, what happens when two or more are in one accord, are in agreement. The presence of God comes. God hears us when we are together. When two or more are together, He's there. He listens to our prayers. He responds to prayer. Even now, this comes to my mind right now, the account in the Bible where this group of friends had a paralytic friend and took him to see Jesus, and they unified their efforts for this guy to see Jesus and get his healing, and Jesus honor their efforts, their faith put together for his friend. So that just shows you once again the power in unity. Now in this case, it was doing the wrong thing. So in verse 7, God stops their progress by giving them different languages. Why languages? Because if you don't understand each other, what are you going to accomplish? Nothing. And different languages, it puts an immediate barrier of understanding between a group of people, right? I can tell you that because I speak multiple languages, and before I actually learned English, I hated it, by the way. Just a confession here. But yeah, I couldn't understand one single word. I had to actually learn the language and go through all the process and all that. But before that, I didn't understand. So there was no possible way of communication between me and an English speaker. So God gives them different languages, and this obviously puts the barrier of communication between them. But also, further, this would naturally begin to separate people into groups and fulfill God's intent to men after the flood, like it says in Genesis 9, verse 1. Now, verse 9 sums up God's act of judgment with a play on words. The word for the name Babel is very similar to the Hebrew word for confused. In fact, the whole section from verses 1 to 9 includes several allusions in Hebrew for the word Babel. Now, to close this up, let's take a look to the book of James. James 3, it talks about the taming of the tongue, taking control of the tongue. We all know, we can all agree that taking control, getting a hold of this little thing, it's hard. It's very hard. We lost control of it at the Tower of Babel with that curse that was given to mankind. We lost control of our tongue. We got different languages, don't understand each other. We lost control of it. In fact, it says it is a restless evil full of poison. Goodness gracious. I'm sure you know this already, but let me remind you that our God is a redeeming God. Because of Adam and sin entering the world, we were separated from God. But now, because of Jesus and his sacrifice, we can enter again. We are one again with God. With the Tower of Babel came discordance, separation, confusion, disunity. But do you think it's coincidence that through the Holy Spirit we have the gift of tongues, and that the primary evidence of the baptism of the Holy Spirit is speaking in tongues? Just a few days after Jesus' ascension, a great linguistic miracle occurred. There were Jews living in Jerusalem, devoted men from every nation under the sun, and they all heard the apostles speaking their language. It was like Babel in reverse. God uniting languages again through the baptism of the Holy Spirit. And of course, at the end of this age, there will be a great multitude of people from every nation, every tribe, every tongue, confessing and declaring that Jesus is Lord. The curse of Babel, separation, and division will end forever. Thank you so much for listening to this teaching. I know we say this every time, but for real, this is so rich that I encourage you to go back, read Genesis 11, and dig in deeper and deeper. Please download your study guide and now discuss with your family and friends what we have discussed today. Remember to send your questions or even things that you have discovered to rootedintheword@gmail.com. That is rooted, the letter N, the word, @gmail.com. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.